Hello, everybody. My name is Colton. I am from Colton Iverson Writing on YouTube and Penning Grimoire on Instagram. And I am here today with an interview with a fantastic author named Luis. Could you give yourself a little introduction, Luis?
Hey, what's going on, everyone? My name's Luis, as Colton just said. Um, uh, During the day, I'm a civil engineer, and then at night, map maker, fantasy author. Uh, so trying to juggle those three things actually. But it's been a lot of fun.
Fantastic. I mean, I honestly, first thing I have to say is I love your maps.
Oh,
They have this like classic fantasy feel to them, like Tolkien and just a lot of like the older stuff. How long have you been doing map art before?
I started, let's say, about 7 years ago.
Oh wow.
I mean, I've been drawing since I was very little,
Yeah.
but in terms of maps, like fantasy maps and all that, it's been 7 years since I started.
Wow.
And I mainly did it because I wanted to write a story. And I started writing back when I was in college, about the same time, about 7 years ago, 7 to 8 years ago. And I knew, hey, I need a map for my story. So I looked online, Fiverr, different sites. I wasn't too much into Instagram at the time. I don't think it
Yeah.
was that big of a app at the time. So I didn't know, all about the social media, but I did look into like Fiverr, other things. And I was like, well, I can't afford this, so I'll just do it myself. And I started drawing some maps. Of course, at first they were, very basic, kind of like little boy sketches, to be honest. Very, very rough
Yeah.
maps. And over the years, I've tried perfecting it and try to make it better. And
Mhm.
as you said, make it more. I've been influenced a lot by Tolkien and his maps, and I know that he drew his own maps for like the Lord of the Rings, the Hobbit, and all that.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I wanted to do myself because, who better than the author, and the person who's creating the world to know the world, to know the map. So I was like, hey, let's do it.
Yeah. That's amazing. I mean, man, because they really are top notch. Like I'm not just saying that to praise you on my interview here, but they really are fantastic. And it's really cool that you don't just do maps, you also put the art on the sides, and you're actually doing like knights and swords and your coastlines and water and everything just looks so well. What would you say is the hardest part about making a fantasy map?
I think the hardest part for me has been time.
Okay.
Because like I said, I have a day job.
Yeah.
I have a 9 to 5 basically, and so the only time I have to work not only on writing but the maps themselves is during the night.
Hmm.
So I get home around this time. That
Yeah.
I'm doing the interview. So if you look, my time, Eastern time is 7, 8 o'clock, and then I only get like 2 or 3 hours of work time.
Yeah.
Before I know, it's like, oh, I have to go to sleep. So
Yeah.
it's very little time. And then, so the hardest part has been the time management. And a lot of these maps, I feel like I spend too much time on them, trying to do too many details. So that has been, the biggest challenge.
Yeah.
And also getting sidetracked. Like I would start one map, and then it's like, oh, I have an idea for another map, and then I start another map. It's like, well, now I have 3 unfinished maps, right? So
Sounds like a creative person's problem.
yeah,
Just having too
yeah,
many awesome projects to work on at once.
yeah, absolutely.
That's awesome. Well, other than being an author, a fantastic artist, are there any other skills that you use when creating your world, your books, your art?
I think, like I said, being a civil engineer, I sort of have, I've come to develop over my 5 years in the field, um, like a different perspective. Like I see buildings in a different way than most people would see them.
Yeah.
So when I try to draw like a castle for one of the maps or whatnot, I try to think, well, would this make sense? Would this be like structurally sound? If they built this in the mountains, how would they do it? So it's kind of bringing the skills of a civil engineer, and how that would work in terms of, okay, if they build it, like I said, here, would that work?
Yeah.
How would it look? And just trying to research how a lot of the castles were built back then.
Yeah.
And just try to incorporate that into the maps as well to make it, even though it's fantasy, you still have to have a bit of realism, because it can't be too outlandish.
Yeah.
In my opinion, it has to have some sort of a sense of reality, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, that I can't remember who said it. I've heard it from a couple different authors, but they're like, if you want to be an author, don't study creative writing or English in school. Like, do something else, and then you can be an author and use those talents for that. So I think that's really cool that you use your day job and presumably what you went to school for your writing. I think that,
Yeah,
especially if you're able to turn your, like you said, how architecture and how buildings work into an actual legitimate thing in your books. Like that's really cool. And other people that appreciate that, or that know buildings and stuff, will appreciate that. So I think that's fantastic.
right, exactly. And it's funny that you mentioned like my studies, my field, because you wouldn't think, well, a civil engineer, why is he writing fantasy?
What a boring person, right?
Yeah, exactly. You're a civil engineer. What is that?
That's awesome, man. I think that's so great. So, kind of moving towards your book, the Grimalkin Knight. Can you explain, for those who don't know, who aren't familiar with like fairy tales and fae culture, what is a Grimalkin?
So I had this idea for sort of a knight who you wouldn't think to be a knight. And I had this idea because I was looking up some concept art, and what actually inspired me is the Khajiit. There's a concept art of a Khajiit from Skyrim.
Yeah.
And there's this concept art, you could even Google it, of this like cat figure with armor, looking at a campfire. And I was like, oh, that's pretty clever, very unique. And I was like, hey, I wonder what this cat story is. And from there, it sort of spawned. And so when I was looking up names for the character, for the race, I was like, well, what could be a different word than just cat,
Yeah.
And I looked up, Grimalkin is actually an archaic form of like a feline or something like that. So that's basically what a Grimalkin is. It's like a humanoid cat. I was also inspired by some of the, older fairy tales like Puss in Boots and stuff like that. And it's this idea of like a character that you wouldn't think to be brave or a knight, because when you think of a knight, you think of like a strong man, with armor, bravery, and Galahad, who's the Grimalkin, is the opposite of that. He's like a small character, small stature, cowardly, but don't want to spoil anything, for those who haven't read the book or want to read the book, but he goes on this journey to sort of overcome those obstacles.
Yeah. That's awesome. I mean, it's the reason why Catherine recommended I talk to you is because I'm writing a story about a smallish creature who has to take on big challenges in kind of a good versus evil quest fantasy. And so when I told her that, she's like, "Oh, you gotta meet Luis, because I think you guys would get along with just how your stories line up." So that's awesome. And I mean, yeah. Unlike a lot of, I guess, modern readers in pop culture, I'm still a huge fan of classic good versus evil fantasy.
Yeah.
When small or weaker beings, people, whoever, fight larger enemies, So, and I haven't really had a chance to read your book yet because I just learned about you last week. But how did you come up with your story?
Well, like I said, I sort of I looked at that concept art, and I wanted to figure out what was the story behind this cat just sitting at a campfire. What's his story? And like I said, I'm very inspired by Tolkien's work. Mainly The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, and I wanted to bring some of that into my story, so that some of that more fairy tale aspect. When I was young, I used to read a lot of like the Grimm brothers fairy tales.
Yeah.
The Red Riding Hood, all these, cautionary tales and whatnot. The Boy Who Cried Wolf. So I wanted to bring some of those like older, fairy tale stories, and I wanted to create, this whole new world that was kind of like Tolkien, inspired by Tolkien, but with more of a fairy tale aspect to it. And that's sort of how the story evolved over the years. Actually, I wrote a full-length novel, beginning to end, and it's like 100,000 words.
Wow.
But I never published it because, it was crap. And, the characters, just were messy. But one of the characters was this Grimalkin. He was part of this story. I was like, why don't I write a story about him? And that's sort of like, I just picked him out of that story and plucked him into this story and made it about him and his journey.
That's awesome.
So that's kind of how the story evolved.
Yeah.
And like I said, it took me many years to develop, this world and the story itself. And actively writing, it took me, close to 2 years just to get this story down.
Wow. Dang, that's impressive. I mean, anybody who can finish a book, it doesn't matter if it's polished or if it's good, and just finishing a book is impressive on its own.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's a lot of people publishing, but in reality, there's a small percentage of people who actually finish a book. So, I mean, congratulations there, and getting it published, and just it's not too big, but it has great reviews, and so I think that's fantastic. Congratulations for that.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So you seem to be inspired by folklore and fairy tales. Do you, other than Tolkien, do you have some that and the Khajiit picture? Do you have some that have inspired you the most, that kind of gave you this direction?
Yeah, I'd say outside of Tolkien, surprisingly, and I'm trying to. We'll see. Eventually, I would like to get, because the Grimalkin Knight is more younger audience, like middle grade, young adult. I would classify it as. But I've also I've been reading A Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones and all that. So I've been inspired by J.R.R. Martin's writing, his writing style, even though he hasn't finished. But but yeah, his writing is great. The world he created is great. So I've been inspired by that. I also, Harry Potter, of course. I grew up watching the Harry Potter movies, reading the books. So that's also an inspiration, more so for the Grimalkin Knight, since the Harry Potter books. An interesting thing about Harry Potter is it started out as like a children's book, but as the audience grew, so did the books, and that's something that I've kept in mind, that I would like to have that experience with my books, where if a child starts reading the Grimalkin Knight and then the sequel, they're older, the material will be a bit more older, and so that's also been an inspiration.
That's really nice. I'm kind of in the same way where I want to write books that younger readers can read, because I don't know if you've heard of them, but there's this series called the Spiderwick Chronicles. That was the first time I really started reading, was that series. And so I want to do something similar to you and to what they're doing, because it's just, it got me into reading and fantasy, and I just love it so much. So that's fantastic that you're able to find such inspiration from just good stories, just classic stuff. That's great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, one of my last questions for you, Luis, is I saw in your bio on Amazon that you wrote a short story called The Lost Ring. Can you tell me anything about that?
Right. So this was many years ago. This was back in grade school. I believe the third grade, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow.
So back in my elementary school, we had an annual class assignment. Like every grade had the same assignment.
Yeah.
And it was to encourage kids to read, write, So So every class had to write a book. Like each student had to write a story, and they could illustrate it or not, but it was mainly to write, to encourage kids to read and write. So I wrote this book, and as you can tell, The Lost Ring, heavily inspired by The Lord of the Rings. And it was a short, children's story about this king losing a ring, sending out a knight to find it, and he fights an evil wizard. Very, very childlike. But that was essentially my first story. And from that moment, I've always had the sort of the passion to write a book, to actually write a book. That was just a class assignment, but it really got me into storytelling. I was like, hey, one day I want to write more. And over the years, went through school. Went through college and sort of shelved that. But like I said, when I was in college, I found that book that I had originally written. I'm like, hey, maybe it's the time to, bring that back. And from that moment, started writing again. And the passion's been there ever since.
That's amazing, man. How long was it?
The short story?
Yeah, the original one.
It was only a few pages.
Okay.
It was like max, what was it, like 15 pages? It wasn't very long. Yeah.
I mean, that's still pretty good for a third grader. I could barely write when I was in third grade, let alone write that much. So that's pretty awesome.
But I still have it. I have to find it. But I've gone through it. I was like, wow, the writing is terrible. But
But I mean, children's imagination is unlimited. It's
right.
we kind of get bogged down by life as we get older. So that's that. Do you keep it as a reminder of just like your imagination and what you want to write?
Yeah, absolutely. And you hit it perfectly. I keep it as a reminder. Like I said, even though the writing is terrible, I see it as like, wow, such a big imagination, and I want to maintain that, even though now I'm older, and my imagination is probably not as vast as it was when I was a child. I keep it as a reminder, hey, I want to maintain that that fantastical element that I've always had.
That's amazing. I really respect that a lot, because and probably your parents too, for keeping it around and not throwing it out. Or if you kept it all that time, that's also really impressive. So I just think that's amazing, because I still have some notebooks from when I was younger, and I never wrote a story 15 pages long, but I really think that's fantastic. So good job. That's really cool.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Never lose that, because one day when you're famous published author, you'll look back and all your fans will be clamoring to read that book. And
I hope not.
It's a piece of your history though, so that's amazing.
True. Yeah. Thank you.
Nice. Well, Luis, this was fantastic. I truly had a great time talking to you. And is there anything you want to shout out, plug, talk about before we head off?
For the audience, if you're more than welcome to check out my book. It's called the Grimalkin Knight. It's available right now on Amazon, paperback, ebook. Check out my Instagram page, Luis_m.Mejia. You can check out all my maps. Check it out.
Nice. Yeah, all this stuff will be in the description below, so anybody watching this will be able to find it. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, everybody. It's been great. Check out Luis's stuff. Do you do commissions for maps at all?
Oh, good point. Good question. I've been asked a lot about this, and I've been debating about it. Like I said, because of my limited time, but I am gonna start commissions next month.
Hey, there we go. So this will be up like in a week or two. So by that time, maybe they'll.
By that time, maybe they'll be up. Yep.
Awesome. Well, that's really cool, because I'm a huge fan of your style. So I ask partly for selfish reasons.
Hey, that's great. No, yeah.
Awesome.
So keep an eye out for that.
So yes, everybody keep an eye out for it. Yeah, follow his stuff. It'll be in the description. But everybody, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.